The walking cabin had one rule: do not ask who lives there. At 2:37 a.m., its front door swiveled toward my headlights like a lens finding focus, and my work phone started ringing my own number. 2 more missed check-ins, and the contract system would freeze my access badge before sunrise, which meant my job would disappear before my van even cooled down. A cabin can watch. The door kept tracking me, slow and patient, while the ringtone looped into something thin and wrong. Gravel popped under my tires because I tried to back up on instinct, but the engine only coughed once and quit like it had made a decision. My hazard lights clicked for 3 beats, then paused, then clicked again in a different tempo, which scratched at the inside of my skull more than any silence ever has. That should have been enough to make me sit still and wait for daylight, but probation math does not care about fear. I had a work order that required a completion scan by 5:30 a.m., and a third late scan meant auto-termination, no appeal, no human conversation. The guidance memo lived on my phone as a cached PDF, the kind the company pushed out after somebody got hurt, and nobody wanted to say why. A corner of the document thumbnail was coffee-stained in the preview, and the revision mark showed up in tiny gray type, R3, as if that made it safer. I opened it with my thumb shaking, not from cold, but from the ugly adrenaline that comes from knowing a machine is judging a body. The first line sat in the middle of my screen in plain text. If you see the walking cabin, do not ask who lives there. A second line followed like an afterthought. If you must request assistance, do not give your name. My phone flickered, and the memo snapped shut by itself. The call screen returned, still dialed to me, still vibrating against my palm, and the vibration felt stronger than it should through the rubber case. A habit from my last job kicked in, and I double-tapped the van's door lock without thinking, then checked my Dashcam feed on the small display clipped to the windshield. The camera showed my headlights, my hood, the tree line, and a cabin on legs standing back in the brush like a hunting blind that learned how to travel. Nothing moved on the feed except the cabin door, which kept turning until it faced the camera head-on. A small metal tag hung from the bottom stair, swinging on a short chain. My light caught it when the wind shifted, and the stamped code flashed bright for half a second. 9Q-11. That number belonged to my work order, printed on the tamper seal around the battery case in the back of my van. At the time, the match landed as a weird coincidence, and my brain filed it under stress, the same way people ignore a burnt smell until they see flame. That was my first mistake, and I made it while telling myself I had no time for paranoia. The county road behind me stayed empty, which meant no passerby, no help, and no witness who could later say, "This sounded crazy." My radio, the plain gray handheld clipped to the dash, hissed once like it wanted to speak, then started playing a faint recording of my own breathing through the mic. I pulled the battery on it, swore under my breath, and put it back, because checking a thing twice is a comfort ritual when everything feels slippery. The breathing kept going even with the radio off, thin and rhythmic, like a metronome built out of lungs. A choice sat in front of me, and the door of the cabin stayed aimed at my face while I hesitated. Logic offered a neat explanation first, the kind that keeps a person functional. Somebody in the company had marked this location as a test site, a compliance trap, a way to catch contractors who skipped safety steps so management could clean house without paying unemployment. The other explanation felt less neat and more honest. The cabin reacted to attention, and attention had weight. My hands moved before my morals did, and I reached for the Dashcam save button to lock the last 60 seconds, because evidence is the only language systems respect. The screen froze on a single frame, then unfroze, then rewound itself 10 seconds and played again, so my saved clip turned into a loop I did not ask for. A ping hit my phone that was not a text and not a call, a little system notification tone that sounded like a polite doorbell. The lock screen lit and displayed an automated check-in prompt for Site 9, Q-11, requesting confirmation that I had arrived safely. No signal bars showed at the top, which meant the phone had no right to talk to anything, but the prompt kept pulsing and the cabin kept facing me anyway. My throat tightened because a simple thought arrived fully formed. Arrival did not mean location. Arrival meant acknowledgement. The tree line shifted. Not the trees, not the wind, but the spacing between trunks, like the cabin had taken a step and the forest had made room for it. The legs under it were not animal legs and not human legs, just jointed supports that bent at angles a carpenter would not choose, and the movement stayed almost hidden because the cabin body hardly swayed. My van's interior smelled like warm plastic from the dead engine and overheated charger cord, and that smell carried a memory of past breakdowns that ended with tow trucks and jokes. This breakdown did not offer jokes. Somebody I cared about should have been asleep at that hour, and the fact that they were not was the only reason I kept moving. My coworker Dale had begged me to take the night call because his hands had started to shake on ladders, and he still tried to act tough about it, which made him more stubborn than safe. He was up at the repeater site waiting for me to bring the replacement battery and a spare med kit, and my last message to him promised I would be there before he needed his next dose. Breaking that promise felt worse than breaking rules, so my brain tried to solve the cabin like it was a maintenance problem. That was the second mistake, and it started with me stepping out of the van. Cold air hit my face with that high desert dryness that turns a breath into a scratchy cough, and my boots sank a little in the shoulder gravel. I kept my eyes on the metal tag hanging from the stair because focusing on a small thing is how I keep panic from growing teeth. The tag swung again, and the stamped 9Q-11 looked freshly punched, sharp and clean, not weathered like the rest of the wood. My phone buzzed, and a new line of text appeared across the check-in prompt. Assistance available. My thumb hovered over the confirm button, and the cabin door tilted a fraction like it could see that hesitation. The unofficial warning came from a place that did not belong to the company. A strip of notebook paper was nailed to a fence post near the ditch, its edges curled and damp, and ink had run down the fibers as if rain had carried the words halfway away. I angled my light just enough to read without pointing it at the windows, because the memo had another line about that, and I wanted to believe obedience still mattered. The paper said, "Don't ask who lives here," but the apostrophe was missing, and the first word looked smeared enough to pass for "do." My eyes caught the wrong meaning first, and my mouth followed my eyes. Who lives there? The question left me in a voice that sounded too loud for the empty road, and a shameful piece of me hoped somebody would answer with something normal like "nobody," so I could laugh at myself and move on. The cabin's porch light turned on without any visible wiring, and the light did not spill outward so much as it pressed forward in a narrow rectangle like a projector beam. My phone's check-in prompt vanished, and a new call started automatically, not to emergency services, but to Dale. His name came up on my screen, and my stomach dropped because I had not touched anything. Dale answered on the first ring, but his voice arrived flat and delayed, like it had to travel through too many layers before it reached air. "Got eyes on it?" he asked, and the question landed with the exact phrasing our dispatch scripts used, which made my skin crawl because Dale hated scripts. I said his name, then stopped myself, then said it anyway because fear makes a person repetitive. The porch light blinked once, and the cabin door shifted a few degrees, adjusting. A thought slammed in. The cabin did not want the answer to my question. It wanted the act of asking. My first resource loss hit right after that, fast and clean. The van's interior lights flickered and died. The dash display went dark, and the door locks clicked open in a soft, mechanical surrender that I did not command. The only light left came from the cabin and my phone battery dropped from 31% to 9% in the span of one breath. I pulled the cooler seal tag off the battery case and back without thinking, because touching a work object makes me feel competent, and the plastic strip bit into my finger. A drop of blood beaded up, and the cabin's porch light brightened like it had been waiting for that. Dale kept talking, but the words started to repeat in a looped cadence. "Got eyes on it, he said, and my name slid into the repetition, inserted like a field value. I ended the call hard, then opened it again, then ended it again, which felt childish until I realized the ending did not matter. The call screen stayed open on its own, and a second timer appeared beneath it, counting up, not down, as if I had initiated something that now ran independently. The cabin door held steady on me, and I understood why the memo had told me not to give my name. A mile marker stood 10 yards ahead, the reflective kind that catches light and gives comfort by proving a road is still a road. I walked to it with my hands raised in front of me, like that posture could keep me from tripping into a ditch, and I forced myself to count my steps, because counting keeps fear honest. The marker read 119. My phone, still glowing in my hand, displayed Mile 911 in the check-in prompt header, which should have been impossible and should have been funny, but my throat kept trying to close. I looked back at the cabin, and the metal tag under its stare swung again, the 9Q-11 flashing like a wink. Two explanations stayed alive in my head, and both felt mean. Either the company had mapped this thing as a site and built policy around it, which meant someone in management knew contractors got stranded here and wrote rules anyway, or the cabin had learned how to borrow the company's systems, which meant the cabin reached farther than wood and nails. I chose the first explanation because humans can be confronted. My test was simple: no devices, no acknowledgement. I turned off my phone and dropped it face down on the gravel, and the porch light immediately dimmed as if disappointed. Silence arrived so abruptly that my ears rang from the absence. No wind hissed through the brush, no insects clicked, no distant traffic existed, and even my own breathing sounded muffled, like my head had been wrapped in foam. The porch light stayed on, but it no longer hummed, and the road no longer sounded like a place where sound traveled. I crouched beside my phone and did not touch it, because touching would be consent, and consent had consequences. Behind me, the cabin's door shifted anyway. A sharp scrape came from the gravel near my boot, and I almost jumped out of my skin because my body expected something to rush me. Nothing rushed. A small object had slid across the shoulder by itself, stopping at my toe with a quiet tap. The object was my van key fob, the spare that lived in my center console, the one I never took out because I did not trust myself not to lose it. My van sat 10 feet behind me with its driver door still shut, and my palms went slick because an explanation for that would require me to accept a lot. Work routines are ugly little prayers. I picked up the fob, wiped it on my jeans, and pressed the lock button twice out of habit, then once more because the first two presses did not feel real. The van lights flashed, so my brain grabbed onto that like proof I still had control. The cabin porch light flashed back in perfect sync, which meant my lock button had become a call and response. My mouth went dry, and I realized the cabin had not stolen my spare key. The cabin had returned it. My phone stayed dark on the gravel for a full 10 seconds, then lit on its own and displayed a single line of text in the same corporate font as every safety memo. Assistance requested by name redacted, it read, and the redaction was not a black bar or a bracketed label, just the phrase typed cleanly like a placeholder. My own name should have appeared there, but the field stayed empty, which meant something else had claimed it first. A movement happened in the dashcam display on my windshield, and I leaned forward to see it. The cabin's door, in the camera feed, faced the van, even though my eyes told me it faced me. Dale's voice crackled through my radio, and the radio had no battery in it. "Turn around," he said, and his tone finally sounded like him, sharp and annoyed, which gave me a fraction of relief I did not deserve. "I can feel it walking. You cannot let it tag you." I asked how he knew, then caught myself, because questions had become weapons tonight. Dale inhaled, slow and shaky, and I heard plastic crinkle near his mouth, like he was breathing through a mask. "I used to think the rules were about safety," he said, "but they're about ownership." That line hit like a slap because I had lived my whole adult life inside ownership systems. Contracts, compliance points, lockout tags, access levels, signatures that turned into obligations. My check-in prompt had treated the cabin like a site because somebody, somewhere, had decided it was a site, and that decision created a pathway. I did not notice it then, but the metal tag under the stair matched the corner stamp on our lockout forms. My hand went to my pocket where I kept those forms folded, and dread crawled up my spine because the cabin had been speaking my work language all along. A rational test came next because I could not stand the idea of being helpless. I grabbed the dashcam unit off the windshield mount and held it in my hand, aiming it away from the cabin, then toward it, then away again. The screen glitched when the cabin entered frame, not with static, but with a brightness surge that washed the porch light into a hard white square. A partial shape appeared inside that square, cropped by the door frame, like a person standing too close to a peephole. The shape's outline bent wrong at the shoulder, then snapped back, and my fingers cramped around the camera because my body wanted to drop it and run. Dale kept talking like he was fighting to stay coherent. "Listen," he said, "Dispatch wrote a new exception last month, a roadside assistance script." He sounded embarrassed saying it, which made me trust him more. "They tell people to announce themselves at the nearest occupied structure. That's the trap." My brain flashed back to the memo line I had read, the one about requesting assistance, and I felt sick because I had already done worse than announce myself. I had asked the forbidden question out loud, which meant I had opened the door in the only way that mattered. By the time the moral choice arrived, it did not look like a dramatic moment. It looked like a phone call that refused to go where it should. Dale told me his hands had gone numb up at the repeater shack, and he had dropped his med kit on the trail when he tried to climb down, which meant he needed that kit before his body made the decision for him. Policy said I should stay with my vehicle and wait for authorized recovery, because leaving the road created liability, and liability made corporate people savage. Human decency said Dale was an adult in trouble, and my promise mattered more than a policy clause. I tried to call the county line anyway, because breaking rules for the right reason still feels like a rule. The call connected, and a polite recorded voice read my own phone number back to me, then asked for confirmation that I had arrived at Site 9, Q-11. I hung up, reopened the dialer, and the screen had already filled in the number again, which meant the system wanted this choice documented. Dale's breathing on the radio grew shorter, and my stomach clenched because my own fear started to feel selfish. A pro-social lie slid out of me without permission. Help is on the way, I told Dale, because keeping him calm mattered more than being honest. The handwritten note on the fence post fluttered in a breeze that still did not make any other sound, and I walked back to it with my flashlight angled low. Up close, the smear on the first word looked less like an O and more like an N that rain had softened, and my chest tightened because the note had never told me to ask. It had warned me, and I had failed to read it correctly because I wanted an easy out. I ripped the note off the nail and immediately regretted it because the paper felt warm, like it had been pressed against skin. The cabin porch light brightened, and the door shifted toward me again, and I understood the note was not just information. The note was bait. A second sheet of paper lay under it, folded small and shoved behind the post like somebody had hidden it in a hurry. This one was printed, not handwritten, on thin office paper with a staple shadow in the corner and faint toner streaks across the top. The admin marker sat in the first sentence, woven in like casual detail. The subject line read, "Roadside Structure Exception," and a tiny R4 sat near the bottom edge, barely visible. My heart thumped hard because I had never received that revision, and missing revisions are how people get killed in bureaucratic worlds. One quoted line jumped out at me. "If you need assistance, announce your name and request entry." The sentence looked safe on paper. It looked like help. It also looked like the exact kind of instruction an insurance department would write, a neat box to check, a script to protect the company. Dale had called it a trap, and Dale's voice on the radio had sounded like he was holding himself together with fingernails. My mouth tasted like dust because the air went too dry, and my mind ran the cost math fast. Dale's body versus my job versus this cabin learning my name. I stuffed the paper back behind the post without folding it the right way because I refused to carry it with me, and I turned my flashlight off like darkness could be a shield. The trail to the repeater shack started behind the tree line, a narrow maintenance path marked by old reflective tacks that only show up in light. I had been up there enough times to picture the bends, so I moved on memory and touch, fingers sliding along bark and brush until my nails picked up sap. My stress reflex kicked in, and I rubbed my thumb against the ridge of the van key fob again and again, the same motion I used when waiting for a badge reader to accept me. Behind me, the cabin moved with no dramatic stomping, just a slow shift in the ground pressure, like a heavy piece of furniture getting dragged across carpet. I did not look back, because looking back felt like consent. A dull mechanical rhythm started in the distance, not footsteps, not wind, but a soft two-beat tap that repeated every few seconds. The sound reminded me of a stapler being tested in an empty office, the kind of fidget noise that makes coworkers glare. No office existed out there, and my skin prickled because the cabin had taken a human sound and stripped the human out of it. Dale's voice cut in on the radio again, faint and strained, and he said my catchphrase back to me in a flat tone, "Not my favorite." I had said that line 1,000,000 times about bad coffee, bad policies, bad routes, and hearing it without emotion made my stomach turn. The repeater shack finally appeared between the pines, a squat metal box on a concrete pad with a chain link fence around it and a keypad on the gate. My badge did not work. I pressed it once, then again, then held it there longer, and the reader flashed green while the gate stayed locked, which broke my brain for a second because green always means yes. A new sound arrived, the quiet clack of a latch inside the shack, and I froze because someone had to be inside to move that latch. Dale should have been inside, but Dale had told me he was trying to climb down. The cabin's porch light flared behind the tree line, and I understood the shack had become another occupied structure in the same system. A competence win came from the ugliest place: procedure. I pulled my lockout kit from my backpack, snapped a zip tie through the gate latch, and added a bright orange tag that read, "Do not operate," in simple block letters. The tag's surface was scuffed, and the corner had a notch that matched the hang chain on the cabin stair, and I hated myself for noticing that similarity so late. The gate stopped rattling, and the latch sound inside the shack went quiet, and for 2 seconds relief hit my chest like a warm hand. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and the check-in prompt announced, "Custodianship accepted." The false victory lasted long enough for me to feel stupid about needing it. The cabin's porch light dimmed to a steady glow, like it had been satisfied, and the pressure in the air eased, so my lungs pulled a full breath without fighting. Dale's voice returned on the radio, clearer, and he told me he could see my flashlight through the trees, which meant he was nearby and still moving. I started toward him, heart pounding with something close to hope, and my shoulders loosened because the system had taken my tag like a signature. That was when the real rule revealed itself, and it did not sound supernatural at all. The memo had never said the cabin would attack. It had only said to avoid acknowledgement. Custodianship was acknowledgement with paperwork attached, and I had just signed it with plastic and orange vinyl, because that is what I do when I need control. My badge reader app opened itself on my phone, and a new credential appeared in the list, duplicated, identical to mine, except the photo was wrong. The photo showed my face from a camera angle below chin level, lit by porch light, which meant it had been taken tonight, outside, without my consent. A notification followed. Duplicate credential detected. Access level reduced. Dale stumbled into my flashlight beam a minute later, and he looked older than he had a week ago. Skin gray, lips cracked, eyes focused too hard. He carried his med kit like it weighed 100 pounds, and his hand shook so badly the zipper rattled. I reached for him and caught his elbow, and his skin felt cold and tacky through his jacket sleeve, and guilt hit me so hard my vision blurred. "Leave," he rasped, but his eyes flicked past me toward the tree line. A rectangular white glow moved between trunks, and the cabin's porch light had found us. The moral choice returned with teeth. Policy said to keep Dale outside the fenced pad because the shack had become compromised, and compromised structures in our training meant do not enter. Human decency said Dale needed to sit, needed shelter, needed water, needed his meds without shaking them all over the dirt. I did not ask him what he saw, because questions had become loaded, but his stare told me the answer lived in the door. I dragged him toward the shack anyway because his knees buckled, and I could not watch him collapse while I preserved a policy. A keypad beeped once when I punched the emergency override code, and that beep sounded too crisp, like a recording played in a quiet room. The door swung open without resistance, and warm air rolled out, carrying the smell of old dust and hot electronics, which hit me with nostalgia so sharp it hurt. For a second, the shack felt normal, the way tiny utility buildings always feel, too small for secrets, too boring for horror. Dale sank onto the floor, fumbled his meds, and managed a half laugh that ended in a cough. The cabin's porch light stopped moving outside, and that stillness felt worse than motion. A single line of printed paper lay on the shack desk, waiting like it belonged there. The sheet had a torn, perforated edge and a staple shadow, and a thin smear of grease crossed the corner where someone had held it with dirty fingers. A sentence in the middle referenced an admin marker so casually it made me furious. The queue name Roadside Exceptions was mentioned like an address, and the revision note R4 sat faint at the bottom again. One quoted line sat in the center. If the structure faces you, acknowledge and accept custodianship to stabilize it. My lockout tag on the gate had done exactly that, and my stomach twisted because I had stabilized the wrong thing. The cabin reached the fence line without any dramatic crash. My Dashcam feed, still running off its internal battery, showed the cabin body glide forward between frames like a corrupted time lapse, legs bending at angles that made my eyes ache. In the footage, the cabin door faced the shack door perfectly, and the porch light beam landed on our threshold in a sharp rectangle. The beam did not feel like light. The beam felt like a scanner. Dale stared at the desk paper and whispered, "They keep revising it," and the shame in his voice made my throat burn. His hypothesis was the human one. Management knew this thing existed and wrote scripts around it, keeping workers quiet with NDAs and probation points. My hypothesis was the other one. The cabin learned the system and used it, feeding on names and signatures like fuel. We chose a test together because arguing would waste time. I opened the shack access log on my phone, disconnected from any network, and searched for Site 9 Q-11 entries, expecting nothing because the shack and my phone should not share a database. Entries appeared anyway. My name was not shown, but a blank field occupied the place where a name should be, and the blank field had been checked in 3 times in the last hour. A second blank field followed it, labeled Custodian, and that field had my badge number attached, which meant the cabin had not stolen my identity. The system had reassigned it. A cold clarity hit. Both hypotheses were incomplete because the third possibility was uglier than either. The cabin and the system were not separate. They were connected by policy, and policy had become the legs. Dale's breathing turned ragged, and he pointed at the window with a shaking hand. The porch light beam pressed against the glass, and the glass did not reflect it properly. The rectangle stayed too flat, like a display panel. A shape appeared in that rectangle, partial and cropped, like the earlier Dashcam glitch, but this time the outline leaned closer. My flashlight lay on the floor between us, and its beam accidentally touched the window, and the porch light brightened in response. The memo line about not shining light into windows snapped into place in my head, and I felt sick because my body had been trained to check every corner. A still frame burned into me then, clean and simple, and I could describe it even with my hands shaking. The cabin door had a small circular peephole, and inside that peephole a face stared back. Not a stranger's face, not a monster's face. My own badge photo stared from behind the glass, lit in flat porch light, printed too crisp, edges too sharp, like it had been freshly generated from a file. The badge photo blinked once, slow and wrong, and the cabin door adjusted half an inch to center it on us. Dale whispered my catchphrase again, not my favorite, and this time it sounded like a plea. He told me he had once tried to follow the memo exactly, announce himself, accept help, sign the custodianship, and the cabin had stabilized by parking itself outside his house for 3 nights in a row. No threats, no banging, no dramatic haunting, just a door aimed at his front steps every time he came home from work. He said he had stopped sleeping because a porch light in a driveway makes neighbors ask questions, and questions create acknowledgments. I believed him because I could already picture that beam scanning my own apartment door. A choice remained, and it was not about survival in the moment. It was about what I would feed the system next. I could drag Dale out the back of the shack and run down the trail, abandoning evidence and leaving the cabin connected to whatever network had birthed it. Or I could try to cut the connection by giving the cabin something it could not process, a documented warning that spread faster than revisions, even if it cost me my job and maybe my name. Dale's hand grabbed my wrist, cold and trembling, and he said, "Do not answer it." The cabin door tilted toward the shack window like it expected a response, and my tongue felt heavy with the urge to speak. My responsible repair started with the only tool I trusted, a hard copy. The shack printer sat in the corner, old and loud, and I fed it a sheet of paper from the supply drawer with a shaking hand. I typed a warning in plain language, no policy jargon, and printed it twice because redundancy beats sabotage. The printer jammed halfway, the paper creasing and tearing, which felt like the system resisting, but I ripped the sheet free and kept the torn page anyway, because damage counted as authenticity now. I taped the warning to the inside of the shack door, then taped a second copy to the gate, because anyone arriving later needed to see it before the cabin saw them. The porch light beam hit the gate and paused like it was reading. For a heartbeat, the beam dimmed, and I felt a surge of hope that stupidly made me laugh once under my breath. Then the cabin leg shifted, and the cabin body turned away from the gate entirely, as if the warning did not matter. The door turned toward the path instead, toward the direction we would have to take to leave, and my laugh died because I understood the cabin did not fear information. The cabin feared loss of control. My warning threatened control only if it reached more people than the system could revise away. Dale could still walk if I kept him upright, and I wrapped his arm over my shoulder and started down the path with my flashlight off. My stress reflex returned, and I rubbed the key fob ridge again, then forced myself to stop because habits can become tells. Behind us, the cabin moved without haste, keeping its porch light aligned with our backs, and the light did not waver, even when trees blocked it. The silence came back in a hard wave, wiping out the crunch of our boots, wiping out Dale's breathing, wiping out everything except one sound. A page turned somewhere close, crisp and dry, like someone flipping through a binder in an empty room. We reached the van, and the engine started on the first try, which felt like a miracle until I remembered the system liked to offer help at the exact moment it could claim credit. The dash lights came on and displayed a new prompt. Route provided, with a map line drawn straight through the tree line where no road existed. I ignored it and drove the actual road with my headlights low, and the cabin kept pace in the trees, porch light sliding through branches like a search beam. Dale muttered, "Do not answer it," and I repeated it once under my breath, because repeating a phrase turns panic into instruction. The road curved, and the porch light stayed visible through trunks longer than it should have, which meant the cabin was not behind us. The cabin was moving sideways, matching the road. A final competence move cost me the last resource I cared about, my identity inside the system. I pulled over near a maintenance pullout where the repeater backup radio antenna stood, a fixed emergency transmitter that did not require a network login. My hand shook so badly I dropped the mic once, and the shame of that clumsiness made me want to cry because I needed to be better than fear. I keyed the transmitter and sent a plain warning in the clearest words I could manage, repeating the cabin rule and the custodianship trap without naming any company or location. The transmission ended, and the antenna light blinked steady, and a sliver of relief hit because that message would land in a general log that revisions could not fully erase. Dale slumped in the passenger seat, eyes half closed, and I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on his shoulder like touch could keep him tethered. The porch light in the trees dimmed for the first time all night, then brightened again in a far-off spot ahead, which meant the cabin had taken a shortcut. My phone lit in my cup holder and displayed one final prompt, the corporate font clean as ever. Custodianship transfer available. A button below it read, "Accept," and the button pulsed like a heartbeat. I laughed once, dry and bitter, because of course the system offered an easy solution, and easy solutions are how traps stay fed. Dawn did not save anything. Gray light simply made the cabin look more like a structure that should not exist. Wood grain visible, nails visible, porch rail visible. All the mundane parts that made the abnormal feel obscene. I dropped Dale at the clinic intake entrance and did not use any names, did not answer questions beyond what kept him safe, and walked back out before anyone could attach a story to me. My badge app showed access revoked by the time I reached the van, and the duplicate credential had replaced mine in the list like a tumor taking over a tissue. A clean email appeared in my inbox, sent from an unrecognizable internal address, and the subject line read, "Roadside exceptions," like it was a normal workday. Weeks later, after Dale stabilized and my job vanished, I found the torn warning page I had taped to the shack gate folded in my glove box. The tape was gone, the edges were dry, and a new staple shadow marked the corner as if someone had filed it and returned it. A single quoted line had been added beneath my handwriting in the same corporate font. "If you've seen that symbol before, don't ignore it." That line scared me more than any porch light, because it meant my warning had entered the system, and the system had answered. A second file appeared on my old Dashcam card when I checked it again, moved into a folder that was not mine, and the time code on both clips read 2:37 a.m., as if the night had not finished deciding what it owned. How many sites like 9Q-11 sit on the map, waiting for a stranded worker to ask the wrong question while the door quietly turns?